It's time to talk about jewellery, and today we're covering one of the most iconic costume jewellery brands of the 20th century. That is of course Trifari. Now they've got a history spanning decades, so we'll be covering a brief history, some key points from their timeline, looking at how you can authenticate and verify your pieces as well as date them, looking at things like their maker's mark, how it's changed over the years, as well as other resources you can use to make sure that you have verified and dated your pieces correctly. We'll also be looking at a fake item of Trifari, how we've established it as such so that you can avoid making mistake purchases in the future and making sure that all of your Trifari finds are authentic pieces. Now I will also share all of the resources I've used for the research of this video if you want to use them going forward, so they will be in the description so you can save those in your favourites. If you've got any other key resources, please share them in the comments as we go, as it'll help me as well as other viewers. Now as there's so much to share about Trifari, I've split the video into two parts. This will cover all of that history and authentication of your pieces, but I will do a second part that goes into a bit more detail about the designers, key collections and collectibles, and higher value Trifari items to be on the lookout for. So if that is of interest, then please do subscribe and you'll be notified when that video is out shortly. So let's get cracking with the video and look at Trifari's history. Now Trifari has a very long and interesting history, but I will keep it brief and just cover some of the key moments in their timeline. Now it was started in 1910 by Gustave Trifari and his uncle Ludovico Trifari, originally being called Trifari and Trifari. Now in 1917 he was joined by Carl Fischel and Leo Krusman, and in the early 1920s it's not clear if the name changed, but the maker's mark did change to include the K of Krusman's name, so TK, and then in 1925 it changed to KTF, so including both of the initials from those new additions. That lasted until about 1930 when the brand became Trifari as we know it today, just that one word. Now in 1930 that is when they hired Alfred Philippe, which really changed the fortunes of Trifari and made the brand really what it is today. He is their longest serving designer, becoming head designer, and he stayed with them for 38 years until he retired in 1968. But just jumping back to when he joined the brand, he came from a background of fine jewellery manufacturing, coming from Cartier and Van Cleef & Arpels, so he was able to bring that knowledge with him to Trifari and help influence the designs and manufacturing processes to really create the quality that we associate with Trifari, as well as making jewellery that looked like fine jewellery but at costume jewellery prices. Now of course the designers worked with Trifari during this time as well as under the guidance of Alfred Philippe, who was the head designer for many years, and even after his retirement in 1968. We'll touch on those a little bit later in the video. Now in 1937 this is when they added the crown mark to their logo or maker's mark, and this lasted until about 1969. So this time period 1937 to 1969 is what we might refer to as Crown Trifari. Now some people refer to all Trifari as Crown Trifari, but if you're a stickler or maybe being technical, maybe it is only this period we should refer to as Crown Trifari, and anything before or after with the associated brand name at the time. So before KTF and after just Trifari. So let me know what you do in the comments below. Now towards the end of the 1930s, that's when we hit World War II, and Trifari did continue to make jewellery, but they had to change some of their processes with what they made jewellery from. Now before the war they would have used base metals, but these base metals were now being redirected for war efforts. So during this time they made their jewellery using sterling silver or sterling silver coated with gold or vermeil, and this means that if you find any pieces from this time, they are likely going to be finer pieces as they would be silver or silver and gold. Now they also supported the war effort by making things like cartridge shells, torpedo parts and parts for aeroplanes in their factories alongside the jewellery they were making. Now this also led to one of their highly collectible items, their jelly bellies, or as they are formerly known, the lucite group. So when they were making parts for aeroplanes, there were offcuts or imperfect parts of lucite that would have been used for the aeroplane windows. Now Alfred Philippe had the idea to polish these up and make these into jewellery components, and that's what were used for the bellies in the Jelly Belly jewellery collection. So after the Second World War they had to review their manufacturing processes as silver and gold were very expensive. They created their own alloy called trifanium, which was tarnish resistant, and then coated that with tailor-made gold and silver coatings. They tailor-made these to ensure the quality of their pieces, and I think if you were to look at Trifari and other brands you can see that quality and how they've stood the test of time. So 1953 is a year that really helped the brand stand out. Mamie Eisenhower wore Trifari instead of fine jewellery for the inaugural presidential ball, not only in 1953 but also in a following year a few years later, and replacing fine jewellery with costume jewellery, Trifari to be specific, really supported the brand as showing them as a quality brand, putting them in the public eye even more so than they already were. Now going to 1968, this is when Alfred Philippe retired after 38 years in his design role and head of design role, and it was taken over by Andre Boeuf, and he was in place until the 1970s when Trifari was taken over by Hallmark in 1975. Now, as I said earlier, other designers did still work with Trifari at this time and with Andre Boeuf, and even over the various changes of hands that the brand had towards the end of the 20th century. So quite a few. So in 1975 it was bought out by the Hallmark Group, it was then bought in 1988 by Crystal Brands, then 6 years later in 1994 bought out by the same group that owned Monet Costume Jewellery, which I'll also make a future video on that brand, and then in 2000 bought out by Liz Claiborne. And this is where I will stop the timeline, as Trifari is technically still made today, but the production was moved overseas and pieces are no longer marked. But I hope that history has been useful. Quite long, as I said, a very detailed history, but I've cut out a lot there just to try and fit in some of those key moments that we should really know about that can help us with identifying and appreciating our Trifari jewellery. So when it comes to verifying your pieces and even dating them, the first thing to look at is the maker's mark. And the good thing, or maybe the good thing, with Trifari is that their maker's mark on their items changed over the years, which can really help you date pieces or even verify pieces. If you think you've got a piece from a certain time, does it match the style of the maker's mark that should have been used at that time? Now, Trifari were so proud of their creations, as I said earlier, that they did say if it's not marked, it's not Trifari. So all Trifari pieces should be marked. There is only a very small selection of the transition between KTF and Trifari towards the end of the 20s, early 30s, where there are verified unmarked pieces, but anything after that should have a mark, or even obviously before that if it's the KTF or TK mark for the early 20s. So always keep an eye out for that. Now, that being said, there are also fakes on the market where people have tried to replicate the Trifari mark and stamp pieces with that. So you do need to know what the marks look like, how they changed over time, to be sure that you can authenticate your piece. So I'll bring up some visuals, and again I will link below the resources I've used and the credit to these visuals, as there are some fantastic resources out there if you need to refer back to them. Obviously you can't keep watching this video over and over again, so look at those resources that I've linked in the description and use that as a quick check whenever you need to look at your Trifari pieces. So looking at their marks, I already mentioned some of these earlier. In the early 1920s, should I say, the mark was TK in a circle, then that similar mark changed to include the F with the large T and the F and K in a circle. This was up to about the 1930s. Then in the 1930s, this is where we get the Trifari mark. There's no crown and it's all in a sans serif font, so no little bits on the letters, a very simple capital letter font. In 1937, this is where we see the little crown logo going above the T. So going forwards from this point, you should then see the crown logo. From the 1930s up until about 1955, you can also see the words like Pat penned. Now you can also see the word copyright until the point in 1955 when the copyright symbol was used. Now it is worth noting, in 1954, just before that copyright symbol was introduced, they also introduced the hang tag. So on things like necklaces and bracelets, you will find a little hang tag with a T and a crown above it. This did vary slightly, or had variations, but it should look something like this. Now obviously over time that can get lost or fall off, so you do have to look for other marks where it might be on the items of jewellery. So back to the maker's mark, as this does still change over the next few decades, even as the brand is changing hands. So 1969 is the last year of the crown. Then from 1970 we have a similar style font, a very simple sans serif font, all in capital letters, but italicized or cursive depending on the version that you've got. The C for copyright is still there, either next to it or underneath it, and sometimes it's in an oval cartouche if it's not standing alone. Now this lasted until about the 1980s, when it had quite a significant change. So the font changes, it's still all capitals, but it changes to a serif font, and the copyright symbol is dropped for a TM symbol. And then after 2000, when it becomes part of the Liz Claiborne group, all of the jewellery is no longer signed, so you won't find marks on pieces after that point. Now where would you check for the marks? So with things with hooks, it's usually on the outside of the hook, the word Trifari in the style that it should be. Sometimes on the backs of necklaces or bracelets, it will be on the back of links. On brooches and clips, it would be on the back, and with earrings, it could be on the back of the earring or even on the clip if it's a clip-on earring. So always check all areas of the item of jewellery to see if you can find that maker's mark. As we said earlier, if it's not marked, it's not Trifari. And then again, we'll look at a fake later to be on the lookout for in case you spot any fake marks. Now another way that you can whittle down the date range of your items as well as verify your piece even further is attributing it to a designer. So there's a couple of ways that you can do this, and one we'll cover in the next section. So the first one is knowing when the different designers worked for Trifari or designed pieces for them. So I will bring something up on screen in just a moment. I'm not going to read through all of them, but you can save this for reference, screenshot it, or I will link down below the reference that I took this from so that you can again refer back to that if you need to save it in your favourites. Now, different designers obviously worked for Trifari at different points. Some designers signed their work alongside the Trifari mark, so those later designers in the 70s and 80s signed their pieces alongside the Trifari mark. This is a Kunio Matsumoto piece, and it is signed by both him and Trifari. So this helps me to put this in the late 70s to early 80s. It would be the same if I had a Deanne Love or a Jonathan Bailey piece. Not the actor from Wicked or Bridgerton, a different person who was a designer for Trifari. Now if I had an earlier piece where it wouldn't have necessarily been signed by the designer, there are other ways, such as looking at patents, which I will cover next. Now for your very early pieces, the designs were often patented, so many Alfred Philippe pieces, even before Alfred Philippe, you can find patents for their jewellery designs online, but also when you see the patents and see the actual jewellery item, which I will bring some up on screen so that I can show you some from David Murr, some from Alfred Philippe. And this is a great way to check, verify A, that you've got a Trifari piece, but also to date them, as the patents will have specific dates. What simplifies this so much is that manufacturing for these pieces were in the US, so any patents would be with the US Patent and Trademark Office. So you can go there, you can search for names of the designers and who it was for. For example, I typed in Philippe and Trifari and it came up with a huge list of different patents, some not relevant, it's just pulled Philippe in different patents and pulled those forward, but lots of other designs there, all from Alfred Philippe for example, even some for Coro as well. So you can do this for various patents that were in the US, if it's with the US Patent Office. You can of course check other countries' patent offices depending on where jewellery was manufactured, but for Trifari it would be the US Patent Office. There is also another useful website called jewellerypatents.com, I believe it's .com, but I'll link it below and bring it on screen as well so you can see it. And this is also a good resource if you want to find patents as they've been put together in a bit of a database. The only downside to this is it can be a little bit time consuming, as you have to go through them all individually, one by one, and look at them rather than necessarily searching specifics. You can obviously try whittling down that search as much as possible, but if you've got time and you need to verify your data piece, then it's worth it just for the interest to see the different designs that you come across. And another great way to verify and date your pieces is by looking at old adverts. And the great thing about Trifari is it's believed that it is the first costume jewellery brand to actively market their designs, and they used quite high profile fashion and lifestyle magazines to do this. Many of these adverts are still available and online, so you can simply search Google or even on Pinterest. There is a huge bank of all of these adverts that you can look at on Pinterest. You can even buy printed versions on eBay or from printers if you wanted a printed version. So there is a lot to look at, and as I said with the patents, it can be quite time consuming, but it is also fascinating to be able to see all of the collections and designs and what they were advertising, which not only will help you to verify and date your pieces, as these adverts have quite specific dates on them, but also to familiarise yourself with what you're looking for when it comes to finding Trifari jewellery when you're out shopping, or even looking online, you should be able to then spot Trifari jewellery a lot quicker without necessarily having to see the back to check the marks. Now of course you can use books as well, and there have been many books on costume jewellery. You will often find their designs in these books as well. Along similar lines, you could check auction catalogues, and these will often become available online, so you can look through physical copies, and again that's quite time consuming, but you might find it interesting looking at the various pieces to get an idea of different items and values. But then you could also look online at old auction catalogues and results, where you can search them and hopefully whittle down results to Trifari pieces. These aren't available for all auction services, but many and even the bigger houses will have results that go back many years, so again you can check those for historic values and even just to verify pieces that you've got. And then lastly, of course, you do have the avid collectors that will set up their own websites and databases, just like many of the ones that I've linked below, where you've got the adverts and patents, for example, where they've collected visuals of the different designs. So these can be useful to look at for reference and just for enjoyment if you like learning more about jewellery. Now just like other good brands, there are counterfeits out there, and if you're looking for Trifari you will come across these. Many of them are listed as Trifari, and even the pieces are marked as Trifari as well. It's only on close inspection you'll notice that they are not what they appear to be. So obviously you can use those things we spoke about earlier for reference when you look at them in more detail. There are some other obvious giveaways to look out for. Now some of these obvious ones are only there in certain circumstances, and then it's the other more in-depth checks that you'll need to rely on if those aren't. So let's start with this example that I found when I was researching this video. This is a set of prawn or shrimp earrings. They've got enamel, rhinestones, a gold tone finish, and they look like they are almost in the style of a Jelly Belly. Now let's start with the obvious. So on this particular listing, an obvious giveaway that these are not genuine Trifari, even though they're listed as vintage Art Deco. Vintage is even twice in the title. They have sold multiple pairs of these earrings and they're still available. So if you've got a true vintage Art Deco item, you probably don't have multiples of them available, not all new without tags either. So this is a dead giveaway that these are mass produced and they are new items. So what if you find a listing that is just a single item, whether that's on a selling platform or on an individual's own website? If it's just one item, you can't see what sold before or how many are available, what then do you check? So the first thing, as we mentioned earlier, would be the maker's mark. So looking at this maker's mark, if this was an individual listing, some of it looks okay, but the T is wrong and the crown is clearly wrong. The crown looks more like a footprint from Jurassic Park than the outline of the true crown from the Trifari maker's mark. Now if that wasn't enough, you can also look at the quality of the piece, although this can't necessarily be relied on with true vintage items or even antique items. You might have wear and tear that could be mistaken for poor quality. Now of course you can check adverts and books, but you can also do image searches. So copy the image and search on Google for it, or if you're in person, take a photo on your smartphone and then search for it, and other listings should come up. If it is genuine, maybe a legitimate website comes up, or even an advert that matches. Maybe it's a unique piece that you found and that's good, you've got a genuine piece. However, if it's mass produced, you'll likely come across many other listings selling the same or slight variations of that design. You may even come across the original source like Alibaba, Temu, Shine for example, or other type of place like that that sells cheap mass-produced goods. So if that is the case, that's again a really quick check to make early on and a dead giveaway that they are fake. The unfortunate thing is that some people might be selling things genuinely thinking they are Trifari, not necessarily those ones selling many of the items. They must be buying them from somewhere and know they are not real vintage Trifari items, but those that maybe come across them in the wild or come across one item and think they themselves have bought a true Trifari item, then sell it on. I think that has happened, and I did come across this listing where someone has bought a single item and paid around £60 for it. Obviously I'll put it on screen so you can see it. That was just off the top of my head. So someone's bought this thinking they've got a Trifari pair of earrings, and they are, if they realise, going to be disappointed. Now what was interesting is after I viewed the item, the seller sent me an offer with a percentage off to buy these earrings. Now obviously I declined, but I was able to leave a comment with the decline. So I explained that I knew they were counterfeit and these are the reasons why, the checks I had made. I didn't suggest they knew they were counterfeit, just that now that they knew what I had told them, that they should amend the listing before they are picked up by eBay for being a counterfeit item. Now, we'll see if you see the actual images and listing on this video. This is a few days after I filmed it, so it obviously means they've not made the changes, or not made the changes fast enough. So I will be going through all of those ones that I came across during the research and reporting them, and you should do the same. So whether it's for Trifari or any other costume jewellery brand, if you spot fakes out there and fake listings, please do use the options that are available on those platforms to then report them as counterfeit. Hopefully they will get reviewed and taken down. If the buyer is actively selling things that are counterfeit, it might also sort of blacklist them from the sites. And again, obviously you can't necessarily do that in shops, but you can always tell people in the shops if you know it's counterfeit, just to make them aware, and then what they decide to do with it is up to them. So putting fakes aside, there are still loads of fantastic, genuine Trifari pieces out there to add to your collections or reseller businesses. And in part 2, I'll be covering the designers in more detail, collections and key collectible items, as well as those high value items to be on the lookout for. So if you would like to watch part 2 of the video, then subscribe and you'll be notified when that video is out. Now I will link a previous video at the end, which is a jewellery haul, a very good jewellery haul, which is where I found this Trifari and Cuneo Matsumoto piece, along with a piece I didn't even realise was Cuneo Matsumoto. It just happened to be in the jewellery lot, so a real special find. Now I'll link that video at the end if you would like to watch that. If you like jewellery haul videos, there was loads of jewellery in it, so go and check that out next. And if you've got any questions about anything in the video today, or any tips for identifying and valuing or dating jewellery, share it all in the comments below. I will respond to everyone, and any questions or comments help other viewers too, so thank you for your contributions.